everything together. We also have a keel, a big steel keel that keeps the shape of the ship, and also basically is our main structural support for the bottom of the ship. And you also see these plates, these steel plates are riveted together. That means they have basically bolts, not really bolts, they're rivets, holding everything together. There's no welding. Welding didn't really exist in 1895 or 1892 when the ship was launched. And so everything here is held together by these rivets, which were superheated and banged in manually by about 1,000 riveters when the ship was being built. Nowadays, you know, having 1,000 workers on one ship is pretty insane. Back then, that was what you needed. There was no robotics, so you couldn't really build this thing any other way. We have about 200,000 rivets holding us together, and of varying sizes. So we're a riveted ship, which is just the way you did it back then. And like I said, everything up here right now is in armors. Just a round could come right through one end and get right out the other fairly easily. In the Battle of Manila Bay, though, which is our most major conflict in 1898, we didn't get a single penetration of our armor. That's because our steel was a brand new design and it was a lot more malleable than most people are used to. So a lot of rounds would actually break apart on hitting the hull. We got a lot of dents, but only one penetration and no casualties. So the ship was made out, also our armor was made out of Harvey steel, which is a brand new armor technology that was way ahead of its time for that time period. It was actually created by Carnegie, who was the steel tyrant, some people like to call him, in the United States. You know, basically all the steel industry at that point. So there's more and more detail I can get into. I don't know how many of you are actually, is anyone here an engineering type in general? So I'll have to keep it a little basic, I'm sorry. I'll go over the basics a lot of it. If you have any questions though, anything more detailed, you can always ask me. I know a little bit too much about this ship, so you can ask me anything at all. So we're going to head towards the engineering area. I have to turn on the lights still, so I'll have to run away for a second. But what's the price? No, we'll go to the engine room hatch so you can look around a little bit. Co-workers are in. See them all. Now, I'm going to turn on the lights really quick. I'll be right back.
The range of the ship on board. When you study voltage, we'll talk about empires and a lot of other there's like a reason that the Spanish wanted to hold the Philippines, and why the British showed a lot of good, was their navies needed to have someplace to put coal in their ships.
Alright.
They would put these islands and they would be coal stations.
So we have engines on either side of our ship. We have two main engines. These are 300-ton steam engines. They ran off of steam, 300 tons in weight, so they're very, very heavy. And they were powered by 6 coal-fired boilers, and we'll see one of those boilers on this tour as well. Now what we're standing in right now is called the engine room uptake, so all the heat of the engine will be coming out through here originally. This is fairly cool for the engine room uptake. Usually you get about 120, 130 degrees in here. That's why it's treated like an outdoor space with portholes and doors that you usually keep closed to keep the heat out of the officers' area. So right now all we're feeling is the heat of basically a greenhouse effect in here from the sun. So we'll head on down soon. The engines don't run anymore. That's just the imitation sound. As you can see on this board, we get about 5,900 nautical miles, which is almost to the Philippines, not quite. So we actually need a lot of cooling stations around the world. That's why we obtain Hawaii and Midway, especially, to get cooling stations for ships like this. So Hawaii originally was just a cooling station, not a part of the United States. It's kind of a territory or a colony, as some people would call it, for ships like Olympia. So right here, this is, like I said, this is one of our engines. This is the starboard engine called a triple expansion steam engine. It runs on pistons, or cylinders and pistons like a gas engine, like a car, except use steam instead of explosive energy to get the crankshaft or the propeller spinning. And we'll see that down below. This is about 2.5 stories tall, the engine itself. So very, very tall, very, very big engine. We're gonna head on down now. great. It was a little breaking every once in a while, but otherwise you have to be on your game at all times. To add to the stress of this entire system, we had a wet steam system, so it was very hot, very humid in this ship, or at least in this room. So you can imagine it being about 900 degrees to 110, 120 degrees in here, depending on how hot it is outside as well. And high humidity, basically a rainforest, a very hot rainforest. And because this is called a wet steam system, that means it's prone to condensing, or the steam condensing prematurely. So there'll be bits of boiling water here and there from the steam lines that are released. So you can imagine being scalded and all that, all trying to slap the engine, let it slap you, and making sure it doesn't overheat. It's a very difficult job. That's why they got a 15% higher pay rate than the other sailors on the same grade, So what else here? So like I said, there's very few temperature gauges. All you got is steam gauges to tell you the pressure of the system. We ran on 160 psi, which is very, very low nowadays. And steam systems like this haven't changed a whole lot. I mean, they're a lot more technical. You got a lot more computers behind them. But nuclear submarines still use a steam turbine, which is a lot different than this. But this is basically the most sophisticated steam engine that's developed by this point. Eventually transformed into a turbine. It uses the same mentality, but without pistons, blades like in a jet turbine instead. So we're going to hit this way, actually. This is another steam engine. So everything you'll see on the ship is a steam engine. So what it does, this is a circulation pump. These are two pumps, centrifugal pumps, paired up to two steam engines, and that would pull in water for a condenser system, which I'll briefly go over. Come on, crowd back here. You can see the whole end of the boat. Back in the sea. So the things to note back here, of course you can see the whole engine. One of the things you'll note that's kind of strange is that it looks like you're standing next to a big barrel. It's actually a big copper tank. And even the engine has this strange wooden lagging on it, as it's called. Now back then you didn't have aluminum, you didn't really have any lightweight materials like plastic or anything like that to cover engines with. Most engines are covered to keep the insulation in place or to provide insulation to the engine. In this case, they didn't really have a good way to keep the insulation in place except with wood. So they'd wrap everything that was high heat in wooden lagging to protect the insulation from being knocked off or destroyed by the sailors as they're running around with the wrenches and whatnot. So you'll see everything's covered in walnut that's associated with the engine. They have some elaborate joints here, and that means the carpenter was actually part of the engineering force. The carpenter actually had more jobs to do down here than he did up on deck, despite having wooden decks. So very precise work. It ends up looking really nice, but back then that was all for utility. Same with all the brass. You see brass everywhere nowadays. That's considered a fancy metal. You can polish it and everything. Most of the brass and bronze on the ship is painted. They didn't think of it that way. It was just easy to cast and easy to extrude. They thought it was a good material for all these purposes. But as people might know, brass is very soft, so it's very easy to destroy. And they learned that over time and had a lot less of that as they advanced engineering systems later on. So even 10 years later, engine rooms didn't look quite as fancy as this one. Right here, though, this is what looks like a giant barrel. It's not for wine or anything. This is a big old condenser. And a condenser is basically the end of your exhaust.